So welcome back to my channel. Now I really want to do a deep dive on True Detective season 4 Night Country, and I really want to focus on the two main characters, Navarro and Danvers. But I need to have some time on myself to really sit with and process some of the things that happened. There were a lot of triggering things for different people that I think they can relate to, living with grief, having thoughts about not being here anymore, seeing that happen on the screen. So it took me some time to just really sit down because I want to do a deep dive, but allow myself to just kind of breathe from some of the stuff I saw. So we're gonna get into a deep dive, focusing mainly on Danvers and Navarro. So let's get into it. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I do a lot of work with PTSD, complex PTSD, personality disorders, inner childhood trauma. So when I started watching this show, I was like, ooh, what's really happened? There were times where I was confused, the supernatural aspects. Was it supernatural? Was it hallucinations? And I was also wondering, was this show really filmed in Alaska? Okay, but I digress. So this is not gonna go into like all the different scenes and the plot and all that. I really wanna look at it as an umbrella and the different narratives and things that I saw in both these women. So looking at it and seeing how much grief both these characters went through, we're still dealing with. A lot of people go through grief, and grief is so complicated. Do you ever really get over losing a person? And how does your body remember the trauma? Because your body keeps the score. Your body does remember everything. So we have all these layers of unhealed trauma in us that we have not resolved. And so that brings stress, that brings anxiety, that brings different things, because if you don't take care of your trauma is gonna take care of you now. And so we see with Danvers, played by Jodie Foster, she really has different layers of grief, PTSD. She's struggling to be a parent to, I would say, her daughter, who she decided to take care of, losing a child previously, trying to handle so much in this little town, some things related to alcohol. And it's interesting to see how in this community of Indigenous people, how oftentimes white people come into environments where there's already people who are displaced, there's racism, there's just so many cultural aspects. And I was concerned about this show, would they be able to really keep to the Indigenous aspects of this story? Because so many times I have watched stuff related to Indigenous people and it becomes watered down and very whitewashed. And oftentimes there's some kind of white savior coming in. But I feel like Jodie Foster was able to come in as a character, and Issa Lopez was also able to portray this story where it's not so much about a white savior, and to me keep to the tones of the Indigenous people. Now I am not an Indigenous person, so I can't say how accurate it was, but watching it, it did not feel to me as watered down as I see other things. So y'all can let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but I can't speak from that perspective. There were a lot of gaps and holes that I was still wondering about, but my husband always tells me don't think about those things because some of it's not gonna make sense from a viewer perspective. But looking at Danvers and her PTSD and her grief, it was so interesting how the role of the darkness plays such a huge pivotal role in the psyche, and how some of that brought on some hallucinations. And it goes into the role as a therapist when clients are bringing up stuff that to some people might seem unbelievable, not true. It's in my job to go and say that that's not true. If Danvers came to me and was saying that she was having hallucinations and thoughts about someone being present who was deceased, it's in my role to really say that that's not true. Because sometimes those images are a way for people to cope. It's a way for people to stay connected to those people who are not here anymore. So as a therapist, I personally don't feel like it's my role to say like, you can't be seeing that, that's not real. We need to work through that and get that out of your head, because it can be a positive way to cope, but then it can also be a way for people to stay stuck in that process of not being healed, not working through the grief. And for Danvers, I feel like it worked both ways. There were sometimes I feel like she was stuck in her grief, that it got in the way of her doing her job, having relationships. She fell into toxic relationships with people to cope, which a lot of people can relate to. These two women are very relatable. The story and the arc itself might not be as relatable, but these two characters really were. And so it was interesting as the story moved on, how the events, the darkness, the things that she saw, because imagine being in darkness for over 65 days. Now, even though the town Ennis was fake, there is a town, I'll put what it's called because I don't want to mess up the name, similar to what they were going for. So there was a town with about, I think, 5,000 people, Indigenous people, similar to the story that we were talking about, they were talking about. So I will put that at the bottom. But seeing how, I lost my train of thought. I was going so well. Okay, so I was talking about Danvers. Now, as a client, as a therapist, oh, that's what I was talking about. Sorry, y'all. I was talking about how the darkness and being in darkness for 65 days, I read that for some people it does cause some hallucinations, because that all has so much weight on your mental health. Being in darkness for over 65 days, I cannot imagine that. There are people nowadays, when you really dig a little bit deeper, who feel like they're living in darkness, if you really want to discuss it. But that really had an impact. And so as she's having these different memories, it's almost like she had some exposure therapy as we were going through the episodes. And she was able to me at the end, really free herself. It was so much darkness. And then when it finally became light and it was New Year's, it was like she released. Going through that experience with Navarro, the different things that they saw, experienced, it freed her. And it made them a lot closer in the end. And I think that it's a symbolism for all the stuff that she was going through that was pulling her down. She had to be exposed to the elements. She had to be exposed to her trauma. And Navarro helped her through that also, through some of the things that came up for Navarro through the visions that she was seeing. Some people might say it was hallucinations. Some people might feel like it was visions. Let me know in the comments if you feel like it was more hallucinations or visions, but I think they helped to have her overcome the darkness. In the end, we saw her become closer to her daughter, smile. I really don't remember a lot of episodes before that last one of them driving down the road of her smiling. All the weight of everything just controlled her. Her trauma was really in control. But it was great to see her just move through without really directly working on the stuff, being forced to address it. Now, Navarro is my girl. Navarro is a bad mama jam. And as someone who's Indigenous, it felt like a lot of things that she felt, the supernatural. Once again, if you believe that there are visions, hallucinations, I think that they also were very impactful. Now, I want to go back to her relationship with her sister. Her sister went through something, and in the end, she could not fight anymore. So if you watch the show, you know what I'm discussing. Now, it was interesting for HBO to show a scene like that, of someone going through something and losing their battle with it. And it was just such a powerful scene to see. You can feel the emotions. Let me know, could y'all feel the emotions in that scene with her sister? And it shows you how there's so much red tape with mental health, being in treatment, being on a 5150, and how in the end, they couldn't control her from leaving. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who've had family members go through a similar situation, scenario. How could you let my fragile family member walk out? How could you let them go? And there's so much blame. And I think Navarro had a lot of self-blame. Okay, I wasn't there enough for my sister. How could this happen? And so watching her just wipe away the table at the inpatient, her anger she finally let that anger come to the surface and let it out, and she destroyed the reception area. Now, Navarro, I think, is someone who was coping through sex. And a lot of people do cope through physical intimacy. Instead of addressing what is really happening, it's a lot easier for me to just disassociate. And I think you can disassociate mentally, but I think physically you can disassociate. And instead of going through and really working on her problem, she was so fierce, so tough. She's always had to fight. Looking at her flashbacks, her memories, you could tell, I don't think there was ever an aspect in her life where she was able to just like, just breathe. It wasn't to me until the end, once again, the darkness and then that light. When they were trapped in that research facility, the center of a lot of trauma, the center of a lot of hurt for a lot of people in that town, they had to go through that blizzard. They had to go through and sit in all of that stuff in order for things to get better for them. And so with Navarro, also, once again, at the end, I could tell she was breathing. I think a lot of people can relate to holding your breath in and waiting for things to get better. You're so filled with trauma, with hurt, that you don't know nothing different. And I think Navarro did not know anything different. I think these two women from two different places need to come together. You have these two unlikely people put together, not realizing they are each other's person in a sense, to help them overcome through the trauma, through the hurt. And once they kind of like, okay, we're gonna work together on this case and kind of put our own stuff aside, they, to me, without really knowing, started healing and helping one another. Now, as a therapist working with Danvers, I would first stabilize her. I would work on, okay, what does your stabilization look like? Do you have one? Okay, what are your goals for coming to therapy? What is it that you need from this process? Building a rapport, building a relationship with her first, and figuring out what does she need from you as a therapist and what does she need from this process. And then I would probably do some inner child work, some attachment theory with her. And also, of course, I would do some EMDR, desensitizing her to so many different things and working on that core memory of holding. Okay, we gotta work through that core memory and what are the negative beliefs that Danvers has about herself. And then focusing on Navarro, with Navarro, I would work on so many different things. The indigenous trauma piece, having to feel like you have to be strong, masculine, digging into her ancestral roots and how some of those still have a strain on her. I would also work on some of the trauma she's seen in her line of work. That dynamic between her and her sister. We would work on some grief. There's just like so many things to work with Navarro. Like, that is an amazing client, and the development of her character and the actress like played her so well. So those are a couple of things I work with Navarro on. We would do some EMDR work. But I want to know, if you're a therapist watching this, like, what kind of concepts or theories do you think will work with both of these women individually? I do believe I would diagnose them both with PTSD, complex PTSD. I'm sure that they both have layers of depression, anxiety, but let me know what are some other diagnoses that you guys have seen in them. But yeah, it was just, as a therapist, it was so rich to watch. And what do you guys think? What do you think will happen in the next season? It's an anthology series, so what would you like to see more from the show? And were there holes? Because there were some holes, okay? Now I'm not gonna go so much into that. It was more of a perspective from a therapist, a little bit of a deep dive. I'm happy to see at the end, both these women seem grounded in where they are today. There's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of healing to happen, but they were able to use each other and somehow the trauma of other people in the city to kind of dig through this case and kind of free themselves from things that need to be worked on. But once again, let me know your thoughts. Did you watch it? Were you disappointed? Do you feel like you could see these two people in therapy? Do you relate to some of the stuff you saw in the episodes? But yeah, that's all I got. So if you got this far in the video, thank you. I appreciate it. Did you like this deep dive? and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.